The checks looked normal. That was the thing. They always looked normal. Same letterhead, same formatting, same signature at the bottom. Elaine Benanti had been signing checks at Lydecker Manor for years. Checks for utilities, checks for maintenance, checks for payroll. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? She was the managing director. She ran the place. But somewhere between the board's approved numbers and the amounts actually being deposited, something was wrong. Not dramatically wrong. Not obviously wrong. Just quietly, consistently, systematically wrong. And by the time anyone looked closely enough to notice, 5 years had passed. And $500,000 was gone. But who was Elaine Benanti? How did she end up in charge of a federally funded home for the elderly? And how did she manage to steal from the most vulnerable people in Bergen County for 5 straight years without a single person catching on?
Codex.
Maywood, New Jersey, a quiet Bergen County suburb. The kind of town where nothing much happens, and that's considered a feature, not a flaw. Lydecker Manor sat at the center of that quiet, a residential facility with 136 units, home to elderly residents, men and women over 62, people with disabilities, people who needed more than just an apartment. They needed stability, security, someone looking out for them. The facility was operated by the Maywood Senior Citizens Housing Corporation. It received significant federal funding from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. SHU-D money, public money, money designated specifically to protect some of the most vulnerable people in the state. And in January 2017, Elaine Benanti stepped into the role of managing director. She was trusted with everything: supervising employees, communicating with federal housing officials, paying the bills, issuing paychecks, including her own. That last part, that's where the story starts. Because when you give one person the authority to write their own checks and the oversight to review them and the position to explain them, you've built a machine that can run in reverse for a very long time before anyone hears anything grinding. Elaine Benanti ran that machine for 5 years. So what exactly did she do? How do you steal $500,000 from a senior housing facility and make it look completely legitimate? The answer is both simpler and more disturbing than you might expect. Here's how it worked. Every year, Lydecker Manor's Board of Trustees approved salaries, approved bonuses, approved the exact dollar amounts that each employee would receive. Standard governance, standard accountability. And every year, Elaine Benanti received that approval. And then she issued the checks for something different. In 2021, the board approved her annual salary at $132,613. A reasonable, documented figure, a number that had been deliberated and agreed upon by people with fiduciary responsibility for a federally funded housing facility. Benanti paid herself more than $40,000 above that number. That same year, she inflated her approved bonus from the prior year by more than $2,500. But Benanti didn't stop with herself. She extended the same pattern to at least 4 other Lydecker employees, issuing salary checks, bonus checks, and retirement account contributions that exceeded what the board had approved, year after year, from 2017 through 2021. She also cut a supplemental insurance payment to a relative, someone who didn't work at Lydecker Manor at all. Every transaction was documented, every check was signed, everything was routed through systems she personally controlled. And on paper, nothing looked unusual, because she made sure of it. This is how sophisticated financial crimes work. Not with a heist, not with fake identities or exploded safes, with paperwork, with access, with the slow grinding patience of someone who knows that the most dangerous place to hide is in plain sight. But here's the question that should be keeping you uncomfortable right now. If the board approved the salaries and Benanti controlled the checks, who was supposed to catch this? Was there anyone in that building whose job it was to notice the gap? And if there was, why didn't they? Consider the timeline. January 2017. Benanti takes the position. The checks begin. 2018. More checks, more excess, no alarms. 2019. 3 years in. The pattern is routine now. Comfortable. 2020. A pandemic hits the country. Senior housing facilities are under extraordinary strain. Federal funds are flowing. The scrutiny is everywhere, except here. 2021, the final year, the last round of inflated checks, the last transfer to a relative with no connection to the manor. The machine runs one final cycle. December 2021. It stops. 5 years. 136 units of elderly and disabled residents living above the quiet hum of a theft that was stealing from their institution, from the organization chartered to protect them, month by month, paycheck by paycheck. The total came to $544,289.95. Not a round number, not a clean figure, the kind of number that only comes from 5 years of careful, incremental accumulation. The kind of number that tells you this was not impulsive. It was deliberate, sustained, controlled, and yet it did eventually end. Something or someone caused this to unravel. The FBI got involved. Federal investigators from HUD's Office of Inspector General arrived. The whole quiet machinery of concealment came apart. So what broke it open? What finally pulled the thread that Benanti had spent 5 years carefully tucking away? And when she finally stood before a federal judge, what did she say? January 20th, 2026, United States District Court, Newark, New Jersey. Elaine Benanti, 69 years old, of Garfield, New Jersey, stood before U.S. District Judge Madeline Cox Arleo, and she pleaded guilty to embezzling, stealing, obtaining by fraud more than $544,000 of funds belonging to a federally supported housing facility for the elderly and disabled. She admitted it all in open court. The inflated salaries, the excess bonuses, the unauthorized insurance payment to a relative who never worked a single day at Lydecker Manor, 5 years of it. The charge carries a maximum of 10 years in federal prison and a $250,000 fine. As part of her plea agreement, she agreed to forfeit the full $544,289.95. Every dollar she took, returned. Sentencing is scheduled for June 23rd, 2026. But a guilty plea is not the end of the story. It's actually the moment where the most important question finally gets answered. In a courtroom, on the record, in front of a federal judge. Because Benanti didn't just admit what she did, she admitted who she did it to. Elderly residents, disabled residents, people who trusted that institution with their safety and their dignity. And that raises the question that this entire case ultimately comes down to. What does justice actually look like here? What does a federal judge hand to a 69-year-old woman who stole $500,000 from people who had nowhere else to go? That answer is still coming. Sentencing arrives June 23rd, 2026. When it does, we will be here. Subscribe so you are too. And if this story stayed with you, let us know in the comments. It always means more than you think. And when it arrives, it will say something about more than just Elaine Benanti. There's a particular kind of institutional failure that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with a breaking news alert or a dramatic confrontation. It arrives slowly, in spreadsheets, in paychecks, in the gap between what the board approved and what actually got deposited. The residents of Lydecker Manor likely never noticed. That was by design. The theft lived in the accounting, in the back office systems, in the quiet authority of a woman who had been trusted completely and who understood that complete trust in the wrong hands becomes a weapon. Elaine Benanti will face sentencing in June 2026. The FBI and HUD's Office of Inspector General will continue their work, chasing federal dollars into places they were never supposed to go. And Lydecker Manor will go on. Its 136 units, its elderly residents, its mission, still standing. But the people who live there deserve better than this. They always did.